the Energy, Climate Change, and Environmental Justice Committee to order. A quorum is present. Mr. O'Farrell, Mr. Krikorian, and myself, Paul Koretz, chairing as vice chair. Item number 2 will be continued at the request of the city attorney. And I'd like to ask item number 1 and 4 to go on consent, if there are no objections. Hearing none, those items pass without objection. We have no one signed up to speak under public comments, so public comments are opened and closed. And now let's go to item number 5.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Item number 5. Just a moment. CAO report relative to amendment number 1 to an existing contract with Clean Harbors Environmental Services for the Residential Special Materials Management Program and related matters. You have staff from the CAO and Bureau of Sanitation.
Good afternoon. Claudia Aguilar with the City Administrative Officer. Before you is amendment number 1 to contract with Clean Harbors to provide support for the Residential Special Materials Program and routine and engineering response to hazardous materials. We are asking for an extension for 3 years and an increase of $72 million to the budget. The contract was first executed in 2012. The department has already executed the first option for a 3-year extension. This would put another 3 years on the contract. Sorry. With an expiration of November 2023. We have the department here if you have any questions on the contract.
Well, I know there's at least one company whose pollutants contaminated the San Fernando Valley groundwater basin. Oh, do I have the right item?
No, this is Safe Harbors, Clean Harbors.
Clean Harbors.
Oh, sorry, you are correct. Members, any questions on this item?
I'm still kind of struggling to understand what the full scope of work is on this, because this is a whopping big amount of money. So I know of some of the work that Clean Harbors does, but I don't think I am understanding the full breadth of it. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. The contract originally was just for the residential materials program. The Bureau had 4 additional contracts to do some of the other routine and maintenance work, but those contracts were not renewed. The original Clean Harbors had an option to add the routine work to it, so this contract does both the residential and a lot of the safe. The department can answer more specifically, but it does cover the safe centers around the city, as well as just general cleanups of spills that happen within the department, as well as the cleanups for the homelessness encampments.
Okay.
And so that we have the contract, the breakdown, we have a certain number, of money that's supposed to be set aside for the different divisions, but there is a contingency as well in there in case of any emergencies. So we did, because of the combining of the contracts, the increased scope was substantial compared to the original scope of the contract.
Okay. So there's a variety of activities that are routine for them, operating the safe centers and so on. And then they're also on call for as needed, kind of more emergency type situations.
That's correct, Council Member.
And then there's all the homeless cleanup efforts that they need to be engaged in as well.
That's correct. That's recently something that's been added to the work that the Clean Harbors does. So a lot of the cleanups for the homeless encampments that's been added to the additional work that we're doing with the disposal of our hazardous material. So that's something new that we've been doing in the last couple of years.
Okay. And are these contracts structured such that additional work is done on a reimbursement basis, or is this kind of a fixed sum?
We have rates, so depending on the work that we require, we have set rates that we use on the contract.
Okay, so it's based on actual services performed.
Correct.
It's not that we're paying this large amount of money and then they are on call for us.
No, it's like an as needed, so depending on the work that we need.
Okay. And so what's the plan in terms of actually taking this array of contracts out to procurement again at some point?
So we're currently, the current contract expires in 2023, but we're currently working on an RFP, so that we'll have that ready when upon the expiration of this contract.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Mr. O'Farrell, any other questions? Right, well, given our need to address homeless issues, I think we're okay to move this forward, but as a city family, I think we should keep a close eye on the cost implications because they're obviously substantial. So without objection, I would like to ask that we move this forward. And so that item will pass.
Thank you.
Item number 3.
Certainly, Mr. Chair, item number 3, DWP and CAO reports relative to 50-year license agreement with Honeywell International to implement the North Hollywood Honeywell Settlement Agreement. We have staff from DWP and CAO.
And if DWP staff could give us their report.
Good afternoon, Michelle Lyman, Deputy City Attorney on behalf of LADWP.
Paul Liu, Water Resources Division.
What you have before you is a necessary component part to effectuate a agreement previously entered into between LADWP and Honeywell International. The underlying agreement was approved by the Board of Commissioners, LADWP Board of Commissioners, on November the 19th of 2019, culminating many years of negotiations between LADWP and Honeywell. The 50-year license agreement is essentially a condition of Honeywell's obligations under the larger agreement. They must have access to what we call the Lancashire Yard, which is the larger parcel involved in the license agreement. And then some additional nearby parcels are necessary for piping and monitoring wells, et cetera. So it's very important that this license agreement be entered. And it is in the city's and DWP's best interest to do so. It will not interfere with any other LADWP activities. All of the activities that DWP needs to conduct on these properties, it will be able to do so. It's not an exclusive access agreement, but it is 50 years, and the cleanup may in fact not be finished after 50 years. So if need be, there would need to be another negotiation after 50 years.
I'll be happy to lead that negotiation. Have we identified any other companies that were involved in polluting this site and with whom we can take similar action, or is it entirely Honeywell?
We also have entered into a prior settlement with Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin and Honeywell International are the two, and I'll call them, for want of a better phrase, the primary potentially responsible parties. We refer to them as PRPs. And those two agreements that, once they're in place, will essentially make the city and LADWP whole for the lost water rights in the North Hollywood Operable Unit area, that geographical area designated by US EPA. So I guess what I'm telling you is that there is nothing more to be had if you were to go after others, and there are some others, but they are not nearly as significant as these two. But I can tell you from personal knowledge that these two agreements cover the gamut of your losses at the North Hollywood Operable Unit. With I'm going to say with one exception. EPA has begun issuing orders to, I'll call them the CalMat Vulcan PRPs. And LADWP, and I can't tell you the content because of attorney-client privilege and confidentiality and negotiations, has been meeting with those PRPs. So it's Honeywell and Lockheed for the primary pollutants, and then we call it the Hewitt Pit. It was a disposal site, an unlined disposal site. So you may see something come down the pike related to a settlement there, depends on how things go, or potentially litigation. But that's about all I can say about that. And then there are, of course, other areas of the basin that are separate and apart from the North Hollywood Operable Unit where there is potential to have similar negotiations and similar recovery, if not litigation.
And has that effort begun yet?
The investigatory work has been done. It was took a long time to do under attorney-client privilege and work product privilege. We've done a lot of work investigating PRPs in the Tujunga region, in the North Hollywood Operable region, and in further south, and also investigated the impacts of certain PRPs in the Glendale and Burbank area. Also, I think to have the entire context, LADWP is in the process of either planning and or currently building 3 remediation facilities under Proposition 1, which grants DWP 50% of the funds towards the facility through Prop 1 grants. And there is a remediation facility planned for Tujunga. There is one currently being built in North Hollywood West, and then another one in the North Hollywood region called North Hollywood Central that will essentially protect the Rinaldi-Toluca well field. The Lockheed and Honeywell judgments are meant to replace the lost water rights of the North Hollywood East Branch well field. So by the time you're done, the only sort of tail end to this thing that you won't have covered is perhaps the southernmost end of the basin at Pollock. But you will have, by operation of the Lockheed agreement, the Honeywell agreement, and your 3 remediation facilities have literally brought this basin back from a wasteland. It's like an ocean underground. You can't see it, but it's there. It's like a sea. And it was becoming utterly useless to you. You could pump, but every time you put a new hole in the ground, you would find contamination. So you should feel very good that this little license agreement here, it requires city council approval, a supermajority, because it is 50 years. But all of these pieces that DWP has put into place really have, as far as I'm concerned, I feel very, very good that these agreements will work. The PRPs are very cooperative. EPA has wrapped its arms around these agreements and made them their own orders. They have taken the elements of these contracts and said, this is really good. This is going to remediate the basin. We like it, and now we are going to take what you guys have come up with and we're going to turn it into our own orders. Orders to Lockheed Martin, orders to Honeywell, and now orders to the Calmat Vulcan folks for the Hewitt Pit contamination. And so you get your basin back, you get your groundwater back, and until EPA, at least for Honeywell and Lockheed, until EPA deems that the NHOU is clean. And that may be, it'll be well past any of our lifetimes. And there is an attorney here for Honeywell if you have any questions of Honeywell.
I have a couple of questions, not necessarily in terms of them. Obviously, we know how difficult it is to pump toxins out and to move them around and all of that. How do we keep an eye on them to make sure that the area is actually getting better rather than getting worse? Are there checks and balances of some sort?
The EPA is monitoring this, every step of the way. And there are monitoring requirements, both ordered by EPA and also in the context of this very thick agreement that you have. I don't know that you have it in front of you, but I'm happy to provide it if you do not. There are quarterly meetings between LADWP and Honeywell for the duration of this agreement. So a lot of different people are going to be meeting frequently to go over monitoring results, groundwater elevation, to make sure that the pollution is being cleaned up, to ensure that these things are working. There are 5-year reviews done by EPA. If EPA finds that this very robust remedy that we've agreed to, it's far more robust than anything EPA was contemplating in the past or has ordered in the past. It's, I don't know how many times more robust in terms of the amount of pumping to contain the contamination. But EPA will do a 5-year review. If they think that this remedy is anemic and not getting the job done, they'll ratchet it up and make them pump even more. We've agreed to take, DWP has agreed to take the treated water as long as it meets all potable standards. It's 8,500 acre-feet a year. On top of that, if contamination begins to show up in the Whitnall well field, another well field, because DWP's modeling shows that once everything gets turned on, these Whitnall wells may turn out to be contaminated. Then Honeywell would trigger additional obligations to pump an extra 6,500 acre-feet. So for this small area, this is a lot of water on top of the 4,672 acre-feet that you will be provided in potable water from the Lockheed remedy.
And what's the time frame to construct all the facilities and to actually clean up the groundwater? Do we have a sense yet of all that?
The cleanup will, to start the cleanup, there are two different cleanups. One is to clean the water so it can be served, which is more of an immediate thing. And I might defer to my opposing counsel, John Heights, in terms of the building schedule, but it's really rather an immediate, let's say in the next 2 years or less. It's done in phases. So the first 1,500 acre-feet would be relatively soon, like the next year to 18 months. And then as construction continues, then you would ramp up to the 8,500 acre-feet a year. So when you say cleanup of groundwater, that's an immediate thing where they pump up the contaminated water, they clean it to potable standards, treat it to potable standards, and then hand it to DWP, and it can go straight to the public. There's no waiting game here. Like, this is not like this is something that's going to come to fruition in 10 years or 15 years. It's now. The other piece is the basin itself, which can be 100 years, 200 years. It'll have to be pumped and treated until EPA deems all of these areas clean. It could go on, like I said, more than 100 years for that basin to finally test clean. And of course, you know, right now, when you have surface water infiltrating into the basin, it carries with it contaminants. But these industrial pollutants that date from World War II and post-World War II, you know, it's just going to take a very long time because you can have minute concentrations and that blows the drinking water standard. So you have to, clean means very, very clean, down to parts per billion, and for some of these chemicals, it's parts per trillion, which I can't even describe to you how small that is. So basic cleanup, 100 years or more, your clean water right away.
And how quickly will that impact local water sustainability and our ability to use this water in any significant way?
I'm going to defer to Paul Liu.
Well, essentially, Councilman Koretz and council members, this Honeywell and the Lockheed agreement will provide up to 20,000 acre-feet per year of local water, which is about a quarter of the amount of water rights that we have in the San Fernando Basin. So this will get our well fields restored very quickly. Just to quickly summarize, we think the construction is 3 to 5 years at the site. And like Michelle said, it could take anywhere between 30, 50 to 100 years to actually clean it. But rest assured, what's great about these treatment systems is really the medicine that we need to ensure that the water meets all standards before serving to our potable water customers.
So to reach the number you used, 20,000 acre feet, how soon do we reach that point?
We think that within 5 years, on hopefully the short end, we should be able to have the water into our customers. Now, I say that with a caveat because this is under US EPA jurisdiction. And so there is a schedule that they will be giving to Lockheed and to Honeywell to that. And we can certainly get those timeframes to you. But I would assume within 5 years, we can start getting that water within our system.
So do we know how many Valley families that will serve at that amount of acre feet?
Yes, we do. If we use the metric of an acre foot is enough for 3 homes and 4 members per household, 20,000 acre feet is roughly 240,000 residents that this could be providing water for. Not just to the valley, but
40,000 residents.
240,000, if I use that metric.
And the remediation facilities that DWP is building in Tujunga and North Hollywood West and North Hollywood Central will absolutely hit the ceiling for pumping its water rights. It couldn't pump anymore. Once all of these things are going in tandem, which will not be that far down the road, the only thing that will be limiting you is you can't overdraft the basin, you can't pump more than you're entitled to. Then it becomes a very important issue, these other projects that come before you, which I am not working on, related to, getting the stormwater back in the ground, and the recharge basins become absolutely critical to make sure that the basin is getting replenished.
Very good. Mr. Krikorian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks very much for the presentation. This has been maybe my single biggest environmental priority for 15 years. And so I want to kind of cut to the chase a little bit on this. This is a problem that's been 70 years in the making, and the progress that DWP has made in recent years has been phenomenal. There's $500 million being invested in my district that, when the switch is flipped, is going to bring pure, clean, safe drinking water right now to the residents of the entire city. And we've been waiting for this literally for generations now for this to happen. When people talk about what a crime it is that our stormwater goes out to the ocean, they are 100% right. But we have nowhere else to put it until the San Fernando Valley Aquifer is remediated. And Mr. Kretz, I know you'll remember the water wars in Sacramento when we used to propose water bonds for the ballot, essentially every year. And our Republican colleagues routinely wanted to spend $2-3 billion or more on Temperance Flats or some other dam projects or surface storage project. And none of those projects had the same storage capacity as the San Fernando Valley Aquifer did. And so to spend billions of dollars to destroy wild rivers, to destroy the environment, when we could instead simply get rid of the contamination underneath our feet at a fraction of the cost, always seemed, ludicrous to me. But so we're doing this. And I want to thank you for the work that is going on today in North Hollywood. So you mentioned 2 North Hollywood remediation projects, and I wasn't clear on whether those were 2 in addition to the one that's at the Whitsett soccer fields now, or inclusive of that.
So there are the 2 settlements with the PRPs, Lockheed and Honeywell. There were separate settlements, so those 2. There are EPA orders going to a 3rd PRP, Calmat Vulcan, but we do not have a settlement with them. So those are 3 PRP projects.
No, I meant the 2 facilities. You talked about 2 North Hollywood facilities aside from the settlement that are going to be.
I know what you're
So, Councilmember, you might be referring to, so we have the North Hollywood West groundwater remediation facility that's in construction right now. So that's the first North Hollywood one.
That's the one that's at Whitsett soccer fields.
You got it, right.
Okay.
That's the one that's already under construction.
Okay.
And the second one that Michelle mentioned is what we call our North Hollywood Central. It's actually in our current North Hollywood pumping station. That's where we're going to be building additional treatment.
Terrific.
So that's the second North Hollywood facility that
Terrific.
Michelle was referring to.
And so just so that I'm clear on what we're approving today, this is not a settlement agreement with Honeywell. That's already in place. This is an implementation licensing agreement that will allow them to fulfill the terms of the settlement.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And then in terms of the other hundreds of potential polluters, as long as this is a segregable, it's hydrologically segregable part of the aquifer, I gather, right? Or not?
Yes and no. It's really complicated.
I know.
Tujunga is none of it's hydrologically segregated, none of it. But some places more than others, like Tahunga has a fault, and you can distinguish Tahunga, but it doesn't mean to say that contaminant molecules from Tahunga aren't finding their way further south. It's just
Okay.
very hard to prove.
But in terms of our being able to comply with clean water regulations, you indicated earlier that the settlements that are currently in place would meet the needs of all, would make up for all of our potential water loss to contamination in this area.
Exactly.
Okay. So if there are other potentially responsible parties within that area, that's Honeywell's problem. That's not our problem. That's a
Exactly.
RCRA matter. They can
Exactly.
sue other parties and try and reclaim from other parties, but that
Yes.
doesn't impact us one way or the other.
No?
Perfect. And then I guess the Hewitt pit, is that adjacent to the Vulcan pit? You mentioned Vulcan.
It's the same thing. CalMat Vulcan is the responsible party for
Okay.
the locale, which is
Okay.
known as the Hewitt pit. It's
Okay.
all one and the same.
It's the former Hewitt Pit landfill over there.
Okay.
That's owned by Vulcan Materials
And
right now.
CalMat.
Okay. Very good. It's whatever we can do to expedite, the quicker and the more the better. But I'm just thrilled that we've gotten to the point that we're at.
Thank you, so are we.
Yeah, thank you.
It will require, just one more thing, it will require a supermajority of the council. Just putting that in your ear, it will require that.
Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That should not be a problem. This is great work on the settlement. It's fascinating that the future settlement monitors aren't even born yet. That's how long this will go on. This is like one of those greatest stories that no one will ever hear about because the media won't cover it.
Absolutely.
But what an accomplishment. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have one other question.
He volunteered to be the monitor.
Yes, 50 years
It's
from now,
motivation to stick around.
if I'm still alive when I'm 114, I will be happy to monitor that.
I think that's entirely possible, Mr. Cox.
Yeah, not necessarily committing, though. One question. A few years ago, I was on the MWD board, and I got them to commit $20 million to this project, and I've never heard a peep about it since. So did that ever come to fruition? Was there any way to use that money?
Councilmember Kretz, can you refresh our memory as to what project that was for? I'm not familiar. You said it was a $20 million.
Yeah, that was for this project, the Honeywell and Lockheed area, the whole.
Now, Lockheed Martin made a $20 million payment in addition to agreeing to pump, transport, and treat water at the Burbank operable unit. That's the only mention of $20 million that I'm aware of was.
Yeah, I doubt it. Now, this was before I was aware that, I probably wasn't aware that Honeywell was even being negotiated. This is like 3 or 4 years ago. And it looked, like the city would have to come up with, more of a chunk of that than it looks like we do.
I apologize, Councilman. I am not familiar with that MWD agreement, but we can report back to you and look into that and see what that is, because certainly that's a good amount of money that.
Yeah, they offered to fund $20 million of it, the first $20 million. I'm not sure that anybody ever followed up. I asked about it a few times over the years.
Okay. Let me get
I don't
back
know
to
if
you on
they're
that.
still committed to doing it. It's been a long time.
Yeah,
But-
thank you, Councilmember Correa. Let me look back into that. You might be referring to MWD's Local Resources Program, where they pay you $1 per acre for essentially a rate.
I don't think so. I think this
That was something else? Okay.
This was just, here's $20 million, go get started.
Okay.
So there's one more thing I would like you to take away from this based on the underlying agreement, which hasn't been mentioned here today, is that Honeywell is paying for everything. They're going to build this vast treatment facility. It's called the CCC, the Cooperative Containment Concept, which Paul and his colleagues came up with that name, the CCC. They're going to build that facility at their cost. DWP is allowing them access to the land, and they're going to pay the O&M until EPA says that the North Hollywood operable unit area of the basin is clean. So the ratepayers are not getting stuck with anything. And DWP's time will be compensated for these quarterly meetings and all the work involved.
So it sounds like there's not necessarily even a government obligation that
No.
that they thought a few years ago they would be helping to
No.
fund.
Now, the
So-
other Prop 1 facilities are 50%, but not this and not Lockheed.
So it may be that if this offer is still in place, that we could use that to help fill in the one where we are responsible for
Exactly.
50%.
Absolutely, we certainly will look into that.
Yeah.
So let's take a look. I'm not sure what people will say years later, but probably worth a try.
Yeah, we certainly still have a funding gap there. So anything we can use to offset our ratepayers' money, absolutely. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for that reminder.
And happy we're finally moving this forward and that we can start to see this aquifer actually get cleaned. So very exciting, and I assume this will pass enthusiastically without objection. And so
Thank you.
that has passed. Is there anything else before us on the agenda?
Thank you.
No, sir. That completes your agenda.
So we are adjourned.